Queen's University, Dr. Pipe is currently Chief of the Division of Prevention and Rehabilitation at the University of Ottawa Heart Centre, Heart Institute, and Professor of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Ottawa. Dr. Pipe is one of Canada's leading experts in cardiovascular disease prevention, physical activity and health, and smoking cessation. For many years, he has led research and work in Olympic drug testing, sport and fitness activity, and he is a recognized expert on cardiovascular health and fitness. Dr. Pipe is currently involved in clinical research assessing new approaches to smoking cessation, strategies designed to facilitate exercise adoption, and novel initiatives to prevent cardiovascular disease. In addition to his clinical responsibilities, Dr. Pipe has been extensively involved in sports and sports medicine. He's currently president of the Commonwealth Games Association of Canada. He served as physician at 8 Olympic Games and has been team physician for Canada's national basketball team since 1978. He served as chair of the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport from its inception until 2003. He currently continues his role as associate team physician with the New York Giants football team. Dr. Pipe is the recipient of numerous awards, including the International Olympic Committee's Award for Sport, Health and Well-being. He's member of the Canadian Olympic Hall of Fame. In 2002, he was named to the Order of Canada. He has received 3 honorary degrees, and he serves as Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees at Queen's University. On a personal note, I'm very happy that you'll be able to hear some of the messages that I've heard from Dr. Pipe through the year. I'm very excited that he's here with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Andrew Pipe.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Président désigné, Président sortant, Monsieur le Ministre, ladies and gentlemen, c'est un grand plaisir pour moi d'être parmi avec vous cet après-midi. C'est un grand privilège, c'est un honneur. I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon, and I thank you for the compliment of the invitation to be with you. As has been indicated, I work at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute, but I bring a family medicine perspective to that institute because that is where my roots are to be found. Indeed, I describe myself to my cardiovascular colleagues as being a rose among thorns. Every presentation begins with disclosures, and mine is no different, and I draw your attention to these kinds of relationships which I have had with these pharmaceutical companies in order that you can understand and judge for yourself the objectivity that I bring to the presentation this afternoon. In talking with you this afternoon, I am inspired by a number of individuals who have been my personal medical and scientific heroes, the first of them being Louis Pasteur, who observed that whenever he thought about a disease or an illness, he never thought about finding a cure for it, but always a means of preventing it. And that common sense approach stands us in good stead as we face very difficult, very challenging circumstances in the years to come. As the minister will attest, our health system in its current forms will not be sustainable in the course of the next decade or more if we have unrealistic assumptions like expecting there to be highways, schools, libraries, and municipal services. And so the importance of prevention will never be more important than it will be in the months, the years ahead. And I think it is incumbent upon us all, given the perspective that we share and the familiarity that you all have with the communities that you serve so well, that we become articulate and forceful but thoughtful exponents of approaches which emphasize prevention. For too long, I have been struck in Canada and elsewhere by the fact that prevention gets a lot of rhetorical attention. Less than 1% of my province's total health budget can be described as being allocated to programs of prevention. And clearly, the times for that are a-changing. I'm also inspired by this man, Dr. John Snow, the founder of Contemporary Public Health Processes, and all of you will know that Dr. John Snow distinguished himself by taking arms, if you will, against an epidemic of cholera in his native London, defied conventional wisdom, didn't wait for working groups or interprovincial task forces or seminar planning exercises because he decided that the evidence was strong enough to take action. And ladies and gentlemen, if there's a leitmotif to my presentation this afternoon, it is that we need to think like epidemiologists and act like surgeons. To do the reverse can be problematic, but to do the former can be very, very important. Well, John Snow, as you know, decided that he would take arms against this sea of troubles, and so he single-handedly, one day, publicly dismantled the Broad Street pump. And overnight, the epidemic of cholera in his particular area of London disappeared. A dramatic demonstration that at times it's important that not only we be thoughtful, but we be forceful. That we not be terminally nice, as was a description I heard applied to Canadians not too long ago. That we have to speak out, and not only speak out, but sometimes act. And if we act appropriately and thoughtfully enough, perhaps we will be rewarded, as John Snow was, by having a pub in the city of London named after us. I'm sure that you're all familiar that as a consequence, that you're all familiar that there are two approaches that we can take to the prevention of disease: the population health approach, which is the rising tide raises all boats approach, and a high-risk approach, which means that we identify within our practices or communities individuals who have risk factors or tendencies or proclivities, and we intervene appropriately to take appropriate steps. And these can be represented schematically in this well-known diagram by shifting the entire curve to the left of the population, or shifting one end of the curve to the left. That is those who enjoy, or do not enjoy, but who have very high levels of risk factors. But irrespective of the approach that we take to these initiatives, it is very important that you understand the population that we serve. We need to think like epidemiologists if we are to act like surgeons. And I happen to live in this kind of environment, which is l'ennui sur le rideau, or the city that fun forgot, according to some. Many would say it's cardiovascular Shangri-La, because in this particular area of the country, we have rates of cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular risk factors, which are among the lowest in the country, but 20 minutes outside of that particular area, we have communities that have among the highest levels of risk factors in cardiovascular disease, not only in our province, but in some instances in our country. And I grew up in that area. I grew up in a very small village, some 25 miles north of Cornwall. And at a presentation I gave a few months ago, somebody was kind enough to bring me some pictures of the school that I attended, not quite as it appears now, and also some of the statistics of the day for that part of the province. And 100 years ago, that part of the province led the province in terms of having the highest rates of infectious disease, polio, tuberculosis, and the family physicians of that day were very familiar with this kind of syndrome, spinal tuberculosis, which appeared and was present in the province of Ontario until the mid to late 1950s. Not a lot has changed, because those same communities today manifest unbelievably high levels of cardiovascular risk factors, and as a consequence, high levels of cardiovascular disease. And so it is very important that we remind ourselves that the most substantial and significant predictors of cardiovascular disease are not, as a first-year medical student is prone to reply in response to my questions, you know, it's the reciprocal of the endothelial thickness divided by the distance between capillaries and mitochondrial density, and your serum marmalade divided by urine, et cetera, because we know that it is not your blood pressure, it's not your smoking status, it's not your body weight, it's not your blood cholesterol. Just 6 little ciphers will tell us all we need to know about the likelihood of your health status, and that is your postal code. Because within your postal code, I can tell you your level of income, I can tell you your level of education, I know about your employment status. All those fundamental determinants of health are reflected in that postal code. And so when we look in our particular region, to use as an example, we see that in Eastern Ontario, Renfrew County and the county close to it, we have high levels of cardiovascular disease, substantially above the levels in Ottawa, and we have high levels of risk factor, substantially again above those in the community of Ottawa. The postal code is a very powerful and profoundly important predictor of health status. Unfortunately, our public is still captured by many false assumptions, principal among which are that the reason we have a life expectancy of XD plus years plus Y has everything to do with the fact that we have coronary care units and angiography suites and high-tech this and pharmacological that. Well, this particular classic slide shows you that in the 115, 130 years of recording deaths from tuberculosis, you see that deaths from tuberculosis inexorably declined throughout that entire time period, and those deaths were declining long before we had any idea what caused tuberculosis, and a century before we had any ability to treat or prevent tuberculosis. A profound reflection of the importance of the social and physical environment as being a fundamental determinant of health. And that's a reality which is known to every family physician who understands the ins and outs of the communities that they serve. But it's very important that we translate and communicate those realities to others who are in positions to change those environments, who are in positions to introduce policies, approaches, or programs which can substantially improve the health of our community. I suffer, and I use that word carefully, from practicing in a tertiary care environment. Suffer in the sense that if one wants to make a difference to the health of the community, it's important that one recognizes that for every 8 patients hospitalized in such a facility, 113, 120 patients are seen daily in a family physician's office. And therefore, the power of the primary care community to effect monumental change in the health of our communities needs to be appreciated, and in particular, it needs to be appreciated by politicians, community leaders. I know that in the province of Quebec, the Minister of Health does not need to be reminded of the important role that family physicians play in his community. But in many other settings, that is the case. And our colleagues in other areas of in other disciplines of medical practice also need to understand some of those fundamental realities. I want to take a moment just to fly at 5,000 feet across the pantheon of approaches that can be used to prevent cardiovascular disease, and this will all be, I'm sure, very familiar to you. You know that we can develop health promotion programs or population health programs which ensure that the likelihood of risk factors or diseases becomes reduced. And if you look at these slides carefully, you'll see that population health approaches can increase life expectancy by 10 to 14 years. If we adopt primary prevention strategies, reducing risk factors in the case of cardiovascular disease, we can postpone 30% of all deaths. And secondary prevention can prevent or postpone 22% of all deaths. That's, we're pretty good at closing stable doors sometimes after horses have bolted with fairly substantial results. But the public is not aware that providing perfect care during an acute or a crisis event can only prevent or postpone 8% of all deaths. And so there are very profound misassumptions prevalent in our communities, which it is important for us to identify and to address. Now, this is in some sense, a good news, bad news story, and you're all aware of the concept of good news and bad news. You know, it's said that Moses came down from a mountain carrying 2 very heavy stone tablets, and a crowd gathered, lightning flashed, the clouds parted. Moses stepped forward and said, I have good news and I have bad news. I got him down to 10, but adultery's still in. The good news is, of course, that deaths from cardiovascular disease have been declining substantially over the last many decades, and that your activities, your professional skills, and your professional sensitivities have been a huge part of that success. The bad news is that we face new challenges, a population that is aging, a tsunami of sedentary lifestyle and obesity amongst the young, and the coincidence of a variety of chronic diseases which make the management of those with multiple chronic diseases more difficult.